The heavy iron gates groaned in protest as a young man, let's call him Ethan, pushed his way into the sprawling expanse of Blackwood Cemetery. A sliver of a pale moon hung in the inky sky, its light doing little to pierce the oppressive darkness that clung to the ancient grounds like a shroud. The air was unnaturally cold, a stark contrast to the mild autumn evening he had left behind on the other side of the cemetery walls. It was a biting, invasive chill that seemed to seep into his very bones, making his teeth chatter uncontrollably. A low, mournful wind howled through the rows of moss-covered tombstones, its sound like the wails of 1,000 lost souls. The gnarled branches of skeletal trees clawed at the night sky, their shadows dancing and contorting into grotesque shapes that played tricks on the eyes. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He wasn't entirely sure why he was here. A dare, a foolish test of courage amongst friends, but now, alone in this silent city of the dead, the bravado that had fueled him just an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by a primal, growing dread. He moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the damp, overgrown grass. Each snap of a twig under his boot sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence. The names on the tombstones were weathered and faded, belonging to generations long past. He traced a finger over a particularly old stone, the cold, rough surface sending a shiver up his spine. It was then that he saw her. Amidst a cluster of weeping angel statues, a figure stood motionless. It was a woman, draped in a flowing gown of pristine white, the kind one might see in a Victorian-era portrait of a grieving widow. Her back was to him, her posture rigid and still, her head slightly bowed as if in silent prayer or perpetual sorrow. The stark white of her dress was a beacon in the gloom, an ethereal, almost luminous presence that both drew him in and screamed of something deeply unnatural. She didn't seem to belong to this time, this place. She was an anachronism, a ghost of a memory haunting the present. Curiosity, a dangerous and foolish impulse, warred with the instinct screaming at him to turn and flee. Why was she here alone in the dead of night? Was she lost, in trouble? The rational part of his brain struggled to find a logical explanation, but the oppressive atmosphere of the graveyard smothered all reason. Compelled by a force he couldn't comprehend, a morbid fascination that overrode his fear, Ethan took a hesitant step forward. "Hello?" He called out, his voice sounding thin and weak against the moaning wind. "Are you okay?" The figure remained perfectly still, giving no indication that she had heard him. He took another step, and then another, the distance between them slowly closing. The air grew even colder, the frost on the ground crunching under his feet. He was close now, close enough to see the delicate lace trim on her morning gown, close enough to see the way her dark hair cascaded down her back. "Miss?" He tried again, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't think you should be out here alone." As the words left his lips, she began to move. It wasn't a sudden, jerky motion, but a slow, deliberate, and utterly terrifying turn. Her head rotated on her neck at an unnatural angle, her body remaining facing the graves. The crunching sound it made was like grinding bone, a sickening noise that echoed in the dead air. When her face was finally revealed in the pale moonlight, a strangled gasp caught in Ethan's throat. Where her eyes should have been, there were only two gaping, empty sockets, voids of pitch-black nothingness that seemed to drink the very light from the air. They were abysses promising an eternity of despair and madness. No iris, no pupil, just an infinite, terrifying emptiness that seemed to stare directly into his soul, stripping away all his courage and leaving him exposed and vulnerable. A wave of vertigo washed over him as he felt a strange pulling sensation, as if the sockets were trying to draw him in, to consume him. Then the whispers started. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering on the wind, rising from the cold earth, echoing from the ancient tombstones. They were faint at first, like the rustling of dead leaves, but they grew in volume and clarity, weaving together into a horrifying chorus, and they were all calling his name. Ethan ... Ethan. Join us. Ethan ... The voices were layered, some sounding like the pleading cries of children, others the guttural growls of something inhuman, but all of them were filled with a chilling, malevolent intent. Terror, pure and absolute, finally shattered his paralysis. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get away from her, from the empty eyes and the chorus of whispers. He sprinted through the labyrinth of graves, his lungs burning, his legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled desperation. He dodged tombstones and vaulted over low, crumbling stone walls, the branches of dead trees snagging at his clothes like skeletal fingers. The iron gates, the exit, his only hope for salvation had to be this way. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw nothing but the dark, empty rows of graves. A flicker of hope ignited within him. Maybe he had escaped. But when he turned back, his blood ran cold. He was right back where he had started. The cluster of weeping angel statues stood before him, and among them, the woman in the white mourning gown. She hadn't moved. She just stood there, her head now facing forward, the two black voids of her eyes fixed on his position, as if she knew he would return. Panic clawed at his throat. It was impossible. He had run in a straight line, he was sure of it. He turned and ran again, this time in the opposite direction, his breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. He ran faster, harder, pushing his body to its absolute limit. He ran past a large, ornate mausoleum, its heavy doors slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of the suffocating darkness within. He ran until his sides stitched and his vision blurred. He felt certain that this time he must have covered enough ground to reach the outer wall. He stumbled to a halt, gasping for air, and slowly looked up, the world tilted on its axis. He was back. The same graves, the same weeping angels, the same silent, waiting figure. Every path, every turn, every desperate attempt to flee was a futile effort. The graveyard had become a prison, a twisted, non-Euclidean maze designed by a malevolent intelligence. Each path and every grave was a spoke on a wheel, and at its hub stood the woman, an inescapable anchor in a sea of terror. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, pressing in on him, the voices now laced with a mocking, triumphant tone. He was trapped. The pale moon watched on with cold indifference as the woman in the graveyard slowly, deliberately, began to raise a single, porcelain white hand, beckoning him forward into the eternal, chilling darkness.